Libertinage, the theory of an act without moral quality in Dasein, thought shortly before the French Revolution, was never intended as a reevaluation of values or as the setting of one world and its standards by which the decent citizens are observed and constituted as what they are in the eyes of those who know how to discover them or recognize them. Not like, for instance, I think this was the theme of the film Remains of the Day, and the novelist who wrote it, whose name I can't place just now, I believe is especially interested in that theme, as was Mishima Yukiya. But rather, this idea of the moral or the individual act without quality is the idea of liberty without license at the same time. This is libertinage ultimately would coincide with the liberty in its proper sense. And I think a simple trope of how that was still very innocently envisaged can be seen in Althusser, Logron Althusser, in a YouTube video where he very straightforwardly puts forward his theory of the uninterpolated moment of the actions which are in liberty or without moral quality. They simply disappear into the quartz crystal clarity, evaporate, no longer need to be conscious once the so-called ideological state apparatus goes away, the schooling and worst of all the family itself and everything that can oppress one. He gives this straightforward example of people talking on a rooftop somewhere as though in a public square and just naturally without, I suppose, he gives no further detail, but it says just like this, without any pressures, undue pressures, I suppose, in the as they stand there in immediacy. One would have a litany of questions there. So in a certain way, this is very frivolously imagined, or by that Althusser example. This space, which of course couldn't be realized, was somehow aimed at, but as a removal of all shackles of mores or modes or fixed hierarchy of modes of doing things and so forth. In that sense, we think here of these modes as a future, as grasped as something which can be part of a unity or a union, so-called the most perfect union would be the total conformity to a future, so that future stands almost against presence as this which can be seen, immediately. And this attempt to have the action without quality, the daily, the individual or moral act, which is to say, not in contradistinction to the act which is publicly accepted on a consensus or um, by the laws in the general sense that there's the laws are being constituted as something real and recognized by the laos or the citizenry in former times. Dasein, we should see then um, here in the present and the future as they appear in that example. But the opening is open to both. So the actual slips over the present and the future, um, or the yoke of being, as it were. So looking at Heidegger from the point of view of the classical vision of death, Socrates, who um, speaks of the dog and swears to the dog, which may mean in some way to the Egyptian god of the dead. And so we can see a nice flat and simple vision of what Heidegger means when he speaks of the physicists as being so dangerous as these Hauptwehr Malmer, is it? Hauptwehr Malmer? These chief criminals. In this, he links himself up to Kant, to the critique of Kant as being the all crusher. All is there. I forget how but all crusher is what he had been called for demolishing metaphysics. But if you think of the direct link between the changes that Minkowski made, Einstein's teacher, and some other changes in mathematical thinking to technology through the following argument that one can't predict which theorems will be solved in the near to midterm future. Which theorems will be solved will determine the nature of the physical sciences, and the nature of the physical sciences will determine which technologies come to be. So there's this direct link between this Anubis, which I think is a transliteration of some into Greek of the some Egyptian name. This region of the mathematicians, of the Egyptian mathematicians, which goes along with philosophizing as the speech which rises into the cosmic energy and leaves behind the doxa, which is linked to the empirical and the changing. So the speech which comes into a primitive unity, this speech is linked directly to these first moments of the invention of the geometry and mathematics by the Egyptian priests due to circumstances of leisure. And then one can see directly how that realm of the dead, when it's treated as the realm of geometry and ultimately through Descartes into algebra and algebraic topology and so forth, um, and the physics. Um, One can see directly how this realm of the dead, in this sense of episteme or techne, uh, takes control in the technological essence. Um, of course, that doesn't exhaust the whole notion of technological essence coming into presence and into future um, in a miasmic and in a uh, pervasive way. Um, but it's as though Heidegger wants to reverse Dasein, so that the other part, the nous part, the higher part of the Platonic discussion can also speak back into presence from future. So the future won't be totally dominated. The steering or the guiding of future won't be totally dominated by a future which is um, primarily attempting to read mathematics into the substance of things rather than to allow um, the visual presence of things, which corresponds to human experience, to give expression to itself. Um, in thinking about this, we don't want to take that as a prescription, but rather we especially want to focus on how this circle is being formed between the future and the present contents, and how that constitutes Dasein, and therefore, to sense, as it were, this how and what's going on with that.